Hello, my name's Trevor Moore, work for Jotun Paints. My question is directly to Owen, as we were responsible for all the coatings in the QE2, and would love 13 more of those. So could you maybe identify the 650,000 tonnes as to how the breakdown is, and how much of that would be sourced, do you think, in Ireland?
Again, I suppose I'm using figures that were provided, in the information package we received about the project. I assume that probably the majority of the tonnage of steel goes into the manufacture of the turbine components, the tower sections, nacelles, etc. However, I do know that, for example, there would be somewhere of the order of 100,000 tons of reinforcement steel incorporated into the wind turbine foundations as well. So, as regards how much of that will be sourced in Ireland, I quite honestly can't say at this stage. But I would assume typically that most of the manufacture process will go to specialist workshops, possibly outside the country, where these tower sections, etc., are manufactured.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Johnny Butterfield, Offaly County Council. My concern is the next civil war that we're going to have in this country, because of the people outside there who are concerned about this particular thing. And my question is, first of all, the noise, the health concerns, and the environment. What are the effects on the local community there? And all those people who have signed up contracts with farmers, have they put in a confidentiality clause that most people can speak about the fact that there may be a structure or a turbine in their particular area? I want to know the lifespan of those particular turbines and what becomes of them afterwards.
Okay, so the question is around the health considerations and the lifespan of the turbines themselves. Who would like to address that?
I might
Thank you.
Some of that. No, just in terms of, I suppose, your initial concern there was around noise, and I've been out this morning to meet that group, and once I'm finished here, we'll be speaking to them again. And we have a 2-year program of community consultation that we've started last week that will run until 2015. Within that program, we will meet every single person within close proximity to the site. We're having public consultation clinics, which has now been advertised, and they'll run over the full 2-year period. We also have an open clinic every Tuesday in our office in Edenderry, and we encourage everybody to come along and come into that. The reality is, there's a lot of scaremongering happening around issues like noise in the media, but we have a 2-year environmental impact assessment that has to be carried out first. As part of that, a full and independent noise assessment has to be carried out, and if there are any breaches, it will not be consented. If there is any potential for any kind of disturbance upon a community, it will not be granted. The areas that we're largely working on are very, very sparsely populated areas, but we will be very, very careful to not put out any potential for interference with anybody within over the course of that project. Around, I suppose, around the sign up of land, we made our activities very clear in the media for over 12 months ago. In terms of dealing with landowners, we held public meetings. There was many people who were not landowners in those meetings, and as I said already, attendance of over 1,000. We engaged with the Irish Farmers Association and multiple independent agricultural consultants on that basis. Now, there has to be a sequential order that this project is carried out on. The landowners or the land sign-up process is by and large completed now. Mainstream has over 400 private landowners signed, and the next stage, the next 2 years, will be the community consultation aspect of the planning application, where everybody's voice will be heard, and we do welcome that. The final point was just on lifespan, and again, I suppose some of these questions are yet unanswered, but the standard practice in Ireland for an Irish Connected project, when it receives permission from the local authority, will receive a set of planning conditions with it. Within that, there will be a decommissioning clause within it, which will require the removal of all the foundations and the turbine, the turbine nacelle and the turbine tower itself. There's also bonds that need to be placed with the county council to ensure that there are monies there to take it down after the 25 years. We don't have projects in Ireland. The oldest project is Belcarrick and County Mayo, and that's 21 years at the moment, but certainly the experience on the continent where wind farming has been going on for many more years is that these projects, the smaller technologies are taken down and they're repowered, and more up-to-date technology is then installed on those existing sites. But again, this is all has to go through the full rigours of the planning application that Paul would have taken us through already, and it is a bar that's constantly moving upwards.
Thank you very much. We have a questioner down the back. Okay, thank you. When you're ready.
Hi, Carlos Galvan from Grid Connect. A question for Ian. You didn't mention really onshore cables. I believe there would be a huge amount of cable in the ground for a project of this magnitude. Are we going to see new onshore cable technology being developed for these projects, or are we going to resort to traditional technology, and how are we going to overcome capacitance? For example, are we going to resort to shunt compensation, or is there any new technology that you're developing or that we could be seeing in the next couple of years?
Okay. I think one of the points I made in the presentation was mentioning the 17 R&D centres that we have worldwide. Developing new technologies is the lifeblood of our company, really. This is what keeps us at the head of the field. And I can assure you that there are many programs ongoing to continually develop the products that we have, both in terms of performance, in terms of safety, environmental impact, etc., etc. So the answer is yes, there are developments ongoing. I think with the mainstream details that I've seen so far lends itself to the current technology, but I imagine that that does not necessarily exclude the possibility to introduce at some fairly near future date any updated technology that comes onto the market. I think cables historically have been a relatively conservative product, not so much from our side of the fence, but maybe from the consumer side of the fence, from the customer side. And probably in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen an acceleration perhaps of new technology coming out, largely because of the change of demand profile that has really pushed all of the manufacturers, not just us, but our competitors as well, to producing higher voltage. I mentioned the Western Link project, which is offering a 600 kV level. This is the highest voltage of any cable system that will be operating once it's completed for a DC system. So there are possibilities within our company certainly to increase the extruded cable voltage technology. This is something that will come naturally, I believe, and no doubt our competitors are developing as well. Or if it's traditional paper insulated cable, then the technology for me is already there with polypropylene type insulation, which is being used on both land and submarine applications. So I sincerely hope that we can bring something new to the Energy Bridge project.
Thank you, Ian. We have a question from the back.
Thank you. Tygo Mahoney, Environmental Protection Agency, and it's a question probably for Diarmuid, and I welcome the opportunity here to get I suppose, a picture of the scale and the nature of the extent of what's being proposed. Well, I'm trying to get my head around it at the moment, and the way I look at it is, for mainstream, we're talking about 1.2 gigawatts, and maybe I have the maths wrong, but it's equating to possibly in the order of 15 Mount Lucas developments. And we're talking about an EIS and a project. And are we talking about one EIA/EIS or multiple EIAs and EISs? And I can't get my head around the logistics of how that's going to be managed. And finally, there's reference to applications to local authority. Is it to the individual local authorities an application will be made? or is it to onboard Planola?
Thank you.
Thanks. I suppose initially, just to address the environmental impact assessment and what form that will take. The simple answer to that is we need to be told that by the Strategic Infrastructure Board as to specifically what they wish to see in terms of scope. My own view on it, and maybe Paul might have a view on it as well, is that individual EIAs per site is not really going to be sufficient in this stage. There's a large cumulative aspect to what's been done and what's being proposed, and naturally this has to be captured in the environmental impact assessment process. So what we're preparing for and what we've started in terms of our design of the process on the ground is collection of baselines across the entire site area. As if it were one environmental impact assessment, but some not too dissimilar, I suppose, to the environmental assessments carried out for large-scale infrastructure projects like overhead lines and national roads, which span multiple jurisdictions and a significant area. So we'll be our full on-site environmental assessment starts this summer. And we'd expect to get the specific answer back from the SID process on how they wish to see the division of the EIA, the division of the planning application. And indeed, we still have to pre-qualify for that process, so perhaps it could be individual applications into the local authority. But that's certainly what we're preparing ourselves for. We've been to see the local authorities in each of the counties that we're operating in. We'll be engaging with them over the course of the environmental assessment, and we will be prepared to submit the application locally if it is required to be submitted locally. But I think given the multi-jurisdictional and the scale of what we're talking about, it would make a lot more sense that the application would go in as one application with one environmental impact assessment with multiple interacting factors under the SID process. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I think maybe just to add to that.
Paul?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, Tig, because obviously the project has been presented as a project to onboard Planola, and clearly there are issues with cumulative effects and interactions if the projects are disaggregated into individual components. So you can give a more accurate reflection of the total environmental impact by looking at the projects as a collective. But I understand that Mainstream are also aware of, we'd say, for example, the Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive and its interrelationship with the Energy Bridge project in the eventuality of it being subdivided into individual project components. And I don't really want to get into the detail and the nitty-gritty of the legality of the elements of it, but I'm happy to discuss it with you later today. But it's a material issue.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We'll take one more question before we move on to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My name is Fintan Cooney. I'm currently Chairman of the Midland Region Authority, which represents Laois, Offaly, Westmeath and Longford. And three of these counties, are very involved in this proposed Midland Energy. Now, I meant to ask this question in the first session, but I didn't get time. My understanding from the first session is that Mainstream are purely involved in the export drive to the UK. Bord na Móna are producing for the national grid, and they hope to surplus and get on the export industry as well. So my question is very basic, very simple. I would like to ask Mainstream, how many onshore turbines do they propose to erect in the Midlands, and how many offshore? The second question I'd like to ask was, your representative in the first session talked in figures of 7.5 billion to 13.5 billion to fund this operation from Mainstream. Where is that money coming from? Thank you.
Thank you.
In terms of the onshore-offshore split, the Mainstream project, the onshore portion of it is 400 turbines in 7 counties in Ireland. So that 400, correct? Yeah, 400. So 1,200 megawatts of power is what we're proposing for onshore. The balance of the balance of the resource is largely available in offshore projects. There's 5 individual offshore projects in the Irish Sea which currently don't have a route to market. So, apologies. There's currently 5 projects in the Irish Sea, in Irish territorial waters that do not have a route to market at present, and that's what we would see as the latter stages, certainly, of the development. In terms of the funding, Mainstream is a relatively small player in the market in comparison to some of the larger players out there. We're an Irish, independently owned Irish company. But something we do very well is partnerships and partnering with people around the world. You saw Andy Kinsella speak earlier today, who's heading up our offshore business in the UK, where we're developing just over 7 gigawatts of power. And one of our partners there is Siemens, and partnering is one of the ways that we would see the Energy Bridge required. Our partnership is very necessary to delivering something of this scale. On the generation side, Mainstream, our core competency is delivering onshore and offshore renewables, so that's an area we're focused on. But take, for example, the cable aspect or the transmission aspect to the business. We're dealing with REN and National Grid at the moment. Those are two companies who are looking at developing the asset with us as well. And that's essentially their core competency. We don't install cables, we don't design them, and we don't build them. So what we would see is a consortium-led approach is the way to bring this about. In terms of the funding, I think it largely will come down to the regulatory the regulatory makeup of the energy export or the Energy Bridge project. And one of the aspects that we would be seeking is that the Energy Bridge transmission asset would come under regulation or will be a regulated asset as part of one of the transmission system operators. And as a consequence of that, that would allow for a significant amount of very safe money, cheap money, pension fund money to be attracted into that for the actual construction of it, because it would allow for a regulated return out of it. We've seen this model, or we've seen a similar structure of this model currently being used in the UK for offshore projects, and we'd expect something similar to be done here as part of Energy Bridge also.
Okay, thank you, Dermot.